everyone, and welcome back. This week I have a special guest from Uncapadre Farms, Brittany Duffy, and we're going to be talking about all things regenerative ag and grass-fed, and maybe some bigger philosophical questions. You guys know how I like to get. We got a sort of outline that we're going to stick to the best of our ability. I'm going to ask her like how she kind of got into this. Anybody knows anything about agriculture in the United States, the average age of farmers and ranchers is getting up there, and we're going to talk about that and why that matters. I want to ask her about things she wished she knew when she got into the business and things she did or didn't do. Why we need more young farmers. You know, I alluded to that with the age. Is regenerative agriculture the future of the United States? And the big question is, can it actually sustain the amount of people that conventional agriculture is currently sustaining? And we'll define what those terms mean as well. And where could you start if you wanted to get in and you wanted to dive head first in? I'm not a farmer. I'm not a rancher. I don't have any family members that are, but I did marry into a family that has a ranch background, and it's really interesting to kind of learn. And I, as a naturopathic doctor, it's curious to see the similarities between regenerative agriculture and the soil of the human microbiome. There's a lot of crossover, and so I feel like my job is like connect my patients to the farmers, the people that are doing the work, so I don't have to do 10 things. Too difficult. Brittany, will you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Thank you, Sheena. Thank you so much for having me.
Mm-hmm.
I'm Brittany Duffy. I own and operate Uncapadre Farms here in Montrose. I raise grass-finished beef, which means their cows are on pasture year-round. And I really enjoy what I do. I provide grass-finished beef to our community through the farmers markets. And I'm glad to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to talk ag.
Yeah, let's talk about it. So how did you get into this specific industry? I don't know your full background, but I don't think you came from like a farming family.
No, I grew up on a sailboat in Miami. There's a lot of crossover though between like growing up on a sailboat and a ranch, and that you're very like water thoughtful.
Mm-hmm.
But I always wanted to farm. I always wanted to live where there were seasons. But I didn't really know how to get into it until I was working for the Forest Service. I met Caleb Valdez, who had read a book called No Risk Ranching, which talks about being able to start ranching on leased land. And I always thought, I had been literally saving my entire life to buy land because it was like, well, I want to farm, I need land.
Yeah.
And land just gets like more expensive every year that you're trying to save. But so he went door knocking, and we bought some cows on Craigslist and found some land to lease. And then as our herd grew every year, we were also able to kind of meet other people in the same neighborhood as the lands we were leasing. Or someone would recommend someone else, and that's how we were able to grow to the size that we are, I guess. But at the same time, like working on leased land can be a little precarious in that, of course, like the landowner is still able to do whatever they want with their land. And for a lot of the ground here in Montrose, they've been either waiting to develop it or it's sold and then developed. And so there's a lot of changeover. But otherwise, I'm incredibly grateful to everyone that we lease from. They are all amazing and supportive, and it's just been really fun to keep their fields green, and I think we enjoy the actual relationship too. Whereas if it's a silver lining in that if we were off on a ranch, you know, somewhere in the back beyond, we might not have as many interactions as we get to have now.
Right.
And I think that's a side factor of why the mental health in agriculture is so low for a lot of people, because you can feel really isolated.
Yeah, you're kind of by yourself, and it's day in, day out.
Yeah.
Fixing fence, looking at cows, et cetera, right?
Dealing with everything on your own, where that like you have to work with other people, and we're reliant on other people, and another side factor is like a lot of these people that we're leasing from either used to be in ag or they're they're entirely retired. Everyone is retired, and so I think for them as well, like they enjoy supporting us and having that interaction too.
So that's the difference between, like, you guys are young coming in. They don't see a lot of young faces. Most of their kids, if they had kids, don't want to do it because they saw the hardship that their parents went through. I mean, you work 24/7, 365 days a year, 366 days. I don't care if it's a blizzard, right? Like, you're
Yes.
working every day.
Yeah, Christmas,
Yeah.
Easter, all the days.
Mm-hmm.
And
Calving in February when it's cold.
yes, but we don't have to do that. We calve in April.
Nice.
And green grass. There's a movement towards. We had this shift towards one way of producing food, and I think the pendulum is slowly swinging, and like people are realizing, oh, there are other ways to do things, and calving on green grass is, I think, better for the cows, better for the moms, better for the calves.
Definitely that makes sense than snow.
Better for the humans. Yeah, like it. But the reason that calving in February evolved was largely for the commodity market. So everyone would take their calves to the sale barn in the fall. And,
So they were big enough.
And that was good. Yeah, and that was better for the packers to have this like standardized.
Right. So now we're getting into like some of the bigger overarching, like why ranchers do things a certain way.
Yeah.
Which, okay, so CAFOs.
CAFOs,
Tell me about those, CAFOs.
Or CAFOs, yeah, either concentrated animal feed operations. So I used to be a vegetarian. I was a vegetarian for a very long time, and it was because I was like kind of a rabid environmentalist, but I just the environment was really important to me, and I found out about concentrated animal feed operations, and
it's like proof.
It made me feel terrible for the animals, and I was like, well, there's all this environmental degradation, like why would this? So I thought the solution was to not eat meat.
Yeah.
But
I was part of PETA when I was in high school.
Oh, yes, same.
So I was like
awesome.
right there with you. I did not do well being on the vegetarian diet though because I didn't know how to provide myself with the nutrition that meat provides, and there's not really a comparable, but I had the same thing. Like I ran into this website called cowsarcool.com and I wrote a paper on it when I was in high school, and it just like I still have dreams about the pictures I saw on that website.
Oh, they're
awful, and it's from the concentrated animal feedlots.
Yes.
And then the other problem is that Bob Baxley, he's another farmer I spoke to who's in Hotchkiss.
Nice.
80% of antibiotics that the world produces go for these animals that are in concentrated feedlots.
Yeah. And
so that's a major fucking problem.
Yeah. We had been talking before the show about Will Harris, and the reason that he got into regenerative ag was because of animal welfare.
Yeah.
And there's something called like GAP certification that some people can choose to follow, or and it concentrates on how the animals are being raised, and feed operations, they are being given so many antibiotics for a lot of they're also being given hormones for growth, and they're eating a diet that they were not meant to eat, largely corn and soybeans. And,
corn and soybeans, both of which are genetically engineered, which, the data may be not there yet, but I have some suspicions that there's some problems there.
Well, yeah, it's funny. You can tell in the organ meat, in particular the liver, of an animal that's been on grain versus an animal that's been on grass.
What difference do you see?
I mean, in physical appearance, the beef and the organs, especially the liver, will be like a dark red, and the texture will be very different from like a grain finished animal. The liver is like starting to disintegrate. I know, I'm so sorry. I don't mean to.
No, it's important that people understand that there are differences, because liver gets this tout as a super healthy like thing for us, and it's high in iron, and it's really nutrient dense with other minerals as well that you just can't get from a synthesized B complex. Like you get everything the way God intended for us. And there are differences, and people need to understand. Now, am I trying to scare people from eating? If you can't afford to buy grass-finished meat and the only option is for you to get like the big tubes at Walmart, I would rather you be eating meat than not eating meat at the end of the day, because nutrient-wise, pound for pound, buck for buck, you're going to get more nutrients into your system eating that ground beef.
Yeah.
That's just the reality, and unfortunately, not everybody has the access. But what I love about what you do, Brittany, is you charge $8 a pound for ground beef. You know, your steaks cost, but they're worth it. And, you know, spending a little extra money on some steaks a couple times a month, worth it. And spending $8 for ground beef, that's pretty comparable. Like, it's not exactly 1-to-1, but it's pretty comparable to what ground beef is in the grocery store.
Thank you. I think we've been very intentional on how we've like slowly grown. Like, we just think it's really important to be sustainable for ourselves and for the community. And I think that's been the problem with like commodity ag, is that it's really been sacrificing the farmer. And that's also a reason why a lot of like younger generations don't follow their parents' footsteps, because they realize like they didn't make any money and they worked really hard. And so, of course, they're going to go into another industry where they feel like they're being rewarded for all their efforts. And so I think the problem with cheap food, or there are a lot of problems with cheap food besides just like the farmer being sacrificed.
Definitely.
It's also like our health and
the health of the animal,
animals
the
in the feedlot,
the environment. Like,
yes,
it's multifactorial. And you know, I talk about Maslow's hierarchy a lot, because I want people to understand that, like, hey, I know that we can't all get there, and I grew up dirt poor. Like, we didn't have a lot, and there were sometimes we didn't know when we were going to eat. So I understand that there is an access issue. However, when a person has their basic needs of Maslow's hierarchy met, where they feel safe, they have food, water, shelter, etc., they can get a little higher, and they can start thinking about, how does this have bigger impacts? You know, this is where you were going with Will Harris when we were talking before. It's like, yeah, I could make money right now. I can expedite this, and I can pack those pounds on those cows, but at the cost of what?
Yes. Exactly. And I think even globally, not just here in the US where we are incredibly privileged, but globally, like, malnutrition doesn't necessarily mean undernourished anymore. It actually means like there's like obesity is on the rise.
Over calories, undernourished.
Yeah, we're producing a lot. And that has maybe helped resolve the undernourishment issues, but like, obesity can be just as bad, and so maybe
is not equivalent.
Yeah,
you know, a calorie of ground beef versus a calorie of candy is not the same thing.
Yes, exactly. But one is cheaper than the other and delicious and triggers all of our reward centers, and so we're gonna go for it. And well, I said I was a vegetarian, but I was really a junk fooditarian for sure.
Yeah, me too, because it's easy. You get the thing that's like, oh, well, now it's vegan. It's like, oh, this is vegan. It's plant-based. And it's like, look at the ingredients list. It's like this. I'm like, what is even in this thing? It's plastic. But it gets this touted as like it's so much healthier for you because animals have gotten this bad rep. And it's a more complex conversation than animals are bad for the planet. Cow farts are killing the planet. Really? You're going to tell me that and you have a private jet? Okay.
Yeah, I think just in general, the more that all of us can be educated to like think before we make a purchase, and like what is the incentive here?
Yeah.
And if the incentive is purely profit, someone's trying to sell us something, like I'm actually not saying that everyone should eat beef, because I want them to think for themselves.
Fair.
I also don't ever say like ours is the best beef, because I'm just like, I haven't actually tried everyone in the entire world's beef, so that's a
fair.
superlative that's not like factual, but
it's marketing baloney is what it is.
It's encouraging like complex thought, and I know that's a hard sell sometimes because we just want to think less, and like we're tired from our over busy lives and all that, but I will keep trying, I guess. And
I mean, it's encouraging critical thinking, absolutely, which is something most businesses don't encourage. And this is something with one of my last podcast guests. It's hard to be our authentic self because we're being marketed to it every moment of every day.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah. This is a silly thing, but I have this little part. We only sell beef really at the farmers markets, and because I don't want to ship. Something that Will Harris talks about is he thinks that they got too big, and he wishes that they had just stayed at a scale where they weren't competing with farmers in Colorado or wherever, but that they could just sell to their local markets, and that is what would make up a truly resilient food system, is having small farms across the globe that can support their community.
Exactly.
If you look in like emergency planning, that's like redundancy, and we need that.
We do, because if, God forbid, the world shuts down, there's no more cars, we run out of gas, like whatever happens, who you have, I don't care where your family is, I don't care who your family is, who you have in your community, who your neighbors are, your ranchers, your farmers, those are the people that will sustain us as a community.
Yeah.
Will Harris, as great as his is, and for the viewers that don't know, he owns White Oaks. He was on Joe Rogan not too long ago. He is an old-timer rancher in Georgia, I believe.
Georgia.
And he's converted his conventional ag farm over time into a regenerative agricultural.
Yeah.
And so what that means is the soil has been tended and that there's roots in the system. So, if there is a drought, which Georgia doesn't usually have that problem, they have other issues, the soil isn't just getting eroded. And you can see where we live in Montrose County, Delta County, there's a lot of tilling that happens. And you can see the house is 2 feet up higher than their fields are around them. And that's the topsoil has been blown away and degraded.
That's our number one export, is topsoil.
Oh, I hate to hear that.
Year over year.
The dust clouds, and so this is one of the things that hurts my heart as someone that has had respiratory health issues in the past, is we're blowing away the vital nutrients in the soil. People like Will Harris, people like yourself that are actually tending to the soil are keeping that in place and not in the air. We have a dust ball on our hands. It's just not the same way that the dust ball of the 30s happened in the United States.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So sorry. There was something earlier that I was wanting to go back to. I think more and more, though, people are recognizing that the importance of the soil, and we really are switching from this complicated chemical equation solution that, if we just apply more NPK or to your soils, then it's not as formulaic, and we're recognizing that. Yeah. And so we're going back to just look into the biology, and there's a whole cosmos beneath our feet that we're delving into and learning so much more about. And so I think with the popularity of movies like Common Ground and Kiss the Ground, I think it's helping small scale farms practicing regenerative agriculture become more sustainable. And I have great hope that we are at the tipping point or almost at the tipping point, and just keep having good conversations like this.
Yeah.
That is also literally one of the reasons that I am at the farmers market. It's very small scale, but I think that every conversation is important.
Yeah.
Oh, I know we were talking earlier about monetizing and marketing, being marketing too. So at the farmers market, I have chalkboards, very low tech, obviously, but at the bottom corner of one of them, I have a spark a conversation, because I have this thing in my head where I think serendipitously, someone who is in line with someone else, they should meet each other, and that's why they come to the farmers market, because they want a sense of community. And so how can I foster that? So I have a little conversation question at the bottom, and this gal yesterday at the market, she was like, "Oh, that's also really great marketing, because if people have an enjoyable experience at your booth, then they'll be more likely to come back." And I just had this ickiness factor that I was like, "Oh my gosh, I don't want everything to be monetized or marketing." I just
You're creating memorable experiences in a genuine way, though. That's different than
It's this
Yeah.
It's so ingrained, marketing and monetization, that it's just you do lose what is authentic or what is genuine, what isn't being monetized.
But I do feel like there's a different way to do marketing that is more genuine and less of like, my beef is the best beef. And what you said is like, I haven't tried all of everybody's beef, so I can't say that for sure. And like, I've tried 3 grass-finished beef producers in the area, and they all have a slightly different taste.
That's what's cool about regenerative ag and like any vegetables or proteins produced, in that the biology, the microbiome of the soil across the globe is going to be slightly different, and that's going to help the plants produce. And I am not a soil scientist, so hopefully I'm not misspeaking any of this, but like that's going to produce different phytochemicals in the plants, and those equal flavor. And so that's going to be reflected in your vegetables, in your apples, in your like. People really appreciate lamb out here because the lamb often we have a lot of sage, and people, it's reflected in the meat. And lamb's gonna taste different if you go to New England or the Middle East, like anywhere. And that's what's cool about regenerative ag, whereas the commodity market, we get this like oversimplification of the palate.
Right. And it tastes the same. It's homogenous.
Yeah.
And this is one of the things that got me interested in regenerative agriculture from a health and body and wellness perspective is like, okay, we live in a really interesting climate. It's high elevation, it's super dry, it's kind of gnarly. It's a harsh climate to a degree. It's a lot different than Miami. Miami's different is gnarly in a different way, as in like the mold and it's super wet and negative sea level.
Yeah, yes.
Like different problems, but it's like the food that comes from, I don't know if they even grow much in Florida. Do they?
There's a fair amount of there's a lot of suburban sprawl, I guess, unfortunately. So a lot of the good farm ground has been paved, but there is still.
Yeah. It's like the nutrients that our bodies need living here in Colorado, I suspect are different than our nutrients that we need living in Miami.
Oh.
And the reason I say that is because the climate is different.
Yeah.
The harshness of the environments are different, and so then the wisdom, in my mind, of the soil, when it's properly cared for, will properly care for us.
Yeah.
And tend to our soil, the garden, our microbiome. And the first time I had lettuce from a garden, I was in college. And I was like, oh my God, lettuce has flavor. I grew up on iceberg lettuce, okay? Like most Americans.
Just crunched.
Like just crunchy water. And I was like, wow, this has flavor. Oh my God, like this has texture. And like people don't like endive because it's super bitter. I really love endive because I had no idea that this like chintzy little leafy green could actually have like so much flavor.
Punch. Yeah.
And it's like, wow. And that got me interested in it from wow, this tastes really good. And then, health-wise, it's like, oh, this makes sense. Like, we would eat the food that grows in our area. And I have this new quip of like, the real superfood isn't the acai berry bowls that you're going to go buy at whatever. Where the hell does acai grow in Colorado? It doesn't. You know what grows here? Local beef, local vegetables, local fruit. We have fantastic orchards in our area.
We do.
And the apples that come from our orchards are freaking amazing.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, so it's like, again, I don't have the data to prove, but I know that there's different nutrients and phytochemicals that are available in our area compared to, white oaks. And I bet you his beef tastes different than your beef, or Sunshine in Crawford, who I used to eat quite a bit, and Princess Beef in Hotchkiss from when I lived there. Like, I think it's important that we meet our ranchers so that we support our community.
Yeah. Especially, I think green space is important psychologically.
100%.
And we tend to undervalue it because land development is like...
money.
Yeah, it's money. And it's short term, though. And so I think agriculture is the foundation of civilization. And I think so much of how we raise our food impacts our social, environmental, economic well-being. And we have given it short shrift because with short-term thinking for a long, long time.
One of the things that I've taken from studying with some native elders is the whole, like, we got to think 7 generations. And that made sense the first time I heard that when I was young, because I grew up next to the Navajo reservation. But now hearing it and spending time with, like, these elders who have a lot more wisdom and experience in life than it makes sense that we want to leave the world a better place than, and not just like we're going to leave the world a better place than we found it. Like, no, truly. Yeah. Like, so that it's less of a hardship for them. They don't have to clean up our mess like we're kind of cleaning up the mess from the industrialization of everything, which is a lot of work. And it sometimes feels sad, which is what I really liked about the 2 documentaries, Kiss the Ground and Common Ground, in that they're the only regenerative agriculture movies that made me feel like we're not totally fucked. To be quite honest with you.
Yeah.
They're pretty doom and gloom, it's like when we're thinking about the earth.
Yes, it can be, but it doesn't have to be.
Right.
And I think humans do need hope in order to make change. Like
100%.
if we carry around a shame backpack because we're so worried about everything, then like it's very hard to be motivated to.
It's like, what's the point?
Yes, it's very much apathetic. Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So do you guys practice holistic land management where you intensively graze and you've seen pastures change over time?
Definitely. So we can talk about land management a little. I'm sorry, we've been talking big picture, but yeah. So all of our land is leased, and how we graze, they're very different fields. They'll range from 12 to 40 acres, and landowners also have their objectives too. Sure. So there's a lot of conversations that go on of like what we think would be a best practice and then their context and what they want to see. And sometimes there's compromises, and sometimes a compromise or like it's just a continued conversation over the years, and like continued education for both of us, where we might have thought one thing and been wrong, and they might have thought one thing and been able to see like an improvement that they weren't expecting. So that's been interesting. Mm-hmm. But I will say there's like the cult of the expert that I don't ever want to. I want to approach things with like an intellectual humility and say, we've been trying a lot of things. Some things have worked. Some things we might have had less success with, but it might just be like practitioner error or some kind of weird circumstance. So to be more specific, we leased the field north of the hops from Chris and Audrey, who are amazing, and they grow the hops. And that field, all of our the valley fields are irrigated. Mm-hmm. So they're going to be less brittle than the mountain terrain.
Sure, that makes sense.
And brittleness is like resilience to...
It's like how living the soil is.
Yeah,
Like how much biology is there because there's more water and you can get water there versus the high mountain, which summer grazing areas are less.
Which, like if it's hit with some kind of drought or something like that, it is more brittle, more fragile. And just because it's not irrigated, it doesn't have that additional water. So the unirrigated fields, I think that you can see change a little faster out here in the arid West, where like Will Harris building soil in Georgia will be able to build soil much faster. Yeah, it's still a very slow
but the climate,
lifetime
this is where like
process.
Environment really makes a difference, and why like it's so important that we find what works in our areas. Yeah. And the flood irrigation, I have a friend who moved out here from North Carolina, and she's like, it's so different farming, and she comes from a farm family, and it's like so different here because when the water comes, you got to be ready. And
you do.
If the water's gone in August, the water's gone in August.
Yes, it's true. Or if they cut you down to 30%, just decide like, well, does that mean we like make the whole field suffer, or do you choose like a sacrifice third and like try to still keep the other 2/3 somewhat alive? Like, do you do have to be nimble with livestock in that your stocking rates are going to vary if you do have that some kind of
water
big impact, or But anyway, so to go back to the hops field, since it's irrigated, it so much depends on like the infrastructure, like where you have water, where your animals can drink water. You don't want them like carving a path halfway across the field to go to water because they do have to drink. And so not owning any of the land and not being able to build some of this infrastructure, it's not like the ideal system necessarily where you would really like be able to rotate and have them totally off one whole section for a while. So in any case, we like that field I strip grazed this summer. And we let it rest through the cool season. And actually we had rested it all of last year. So it had all that additional organic matter that protected the soil during our spring, which can be really drying if you don't have any cover on your soil at all. Like you were referencing the tilled acres.
Yeah.
And even if they're just like partially tilled, it's mostly like not having any cover. Like if you can think of one principle of soil health, it's to keep your soil covered or armor your soil.
Yeah.
And if it's not with, ideally it is with a living root.
Yeah.
And something I learned recently is that a single kernel of corn or any seed, but like in this example, a single kernel of corn contains 9 billion with a B microbes, which is crazy. But that's how you can see so much life abound from just having a living root in the soil. Like once you plant that seed, those microbes all go to work, bringing the minerals up to the root and making life, like growing a green plant. And so if you can just have a living root in your soil at all times year round, that's ideal.
That's definitely ideal. And we would also probably see temperatures. Delta County has seen the most as far as like the climate change and like the temperature increase. It's been the biggest impact in the entire country. And I suspect that it has to do with this corn country. Yeah. Everybody and their mom grows corn and they till, and I have seen some farmers in the last year or so, last couple seasons, leave the corn stalk and not till it to the spring.
And they'll often graze that corn stalk. Like lots of people lease that for winter ground. Yeah,
and it's better than just ripping everything up and tilling again in the spring when there's nothing left. So we're moving closer, getting some of these old timers.
Well, and that's what's really hard. Like I totally empathize with those folks that have been working really hard for generations because like it's something new and it's not new,
but it's new concept to them.
It's new to them, and this is how we've done it. And like even there's so much investment, and they have margins they run on these margins that you're just like there's got to be another way. And so if they can take one small step like incorporating livestock and grazing that corn residue and then slightly reduce their fertilizer bill, it's just like, okay, let's reward that behavior. That's awesome.
100%, I fully agree. Or they put manure down, like I am right there with you. And we're fortunate in that we have the Soil Food and Farm Forum every January in Montrose, and it's been really neat to see, these multi-generational farmers be like, I'm not making crap for money and I need to do something, and you're going to tell me to put manure on my field? Cow poop? And they're like shocked at the simplicity of it. And, again, this is one of those things that I see in medicine that's, yes, it can be that simple. And no, it's not magic. It's not overnight tomorrow. Your profits are going to be 100%, but you're going to spend a lot less. You're going to work. I know I had a holistic land management lady on, and the hammock is the symbol of permaculture. We get there, but we don't start there. Just like anything with good elbow grease, you have to work hard to get to where you have that hammock, to where the land is managing itself. And it's not quite that simple, but it can be. Yeah. Where you put manure on and it makes a big difference.
It does. Well, you let like the microbes do their work and then let the plants do their work. And yes. Oh man. So much, it's very hard to
the microbes, the fungus. This is the stuff under our feet that we often take for granted, and most of us don't even put our feet on soil. during the day. We walk on asphalt, we work on concrete, we live in our house, and this is something that I recently made some posts on social media about earthing, and people are often shocked that my business is doing well in rural Colorado, and I think the reason is because ranchers and farmers, they see the same things I see, we just might think about it slightly different. Like their orientation is from a farming ranching, but it's the same. They see the seasons and cycles.
Ground and you start
Exactly.
From there. Yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, my mom was very much put it in the salt water, kind of like if you had a cut or whatever.
Right,
she was
right.
very like, and I think I've carried that with me throughout life. But I did my Peace Corps service in Nicaragua, and it's the second poorest country in the hemisphere after Haiti.
Wow.
And but it's the safest country in Central America. I highly recommend anyone go there. It's incredible. But I was in a very rural part of the Northwest, and there's a health clinic that it had been built like 10 years prior and was a big development. Like
yeah, it was a big deal.
Yeah, and it's a 2-room. There's barely any like glass on any windows in anywhere, and to have a like cement floor was a development. Yes, yeah. And it's like fancy fachenta to have like this like really
what we think of normal basic buildings in the United States.
I think people would maybe look down on it. But what I also, the nurse was this incredible woman, Juanita, and she had been going to the same community. She had clinic on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she would take in a bus and then walk to the clinic. And she talked about over like her 30-year career, how initially she would like go out to every single household because people didn't trust the medicine. And now they were doing a campaign about, she just had been able to see over her career like the trends in medicine. And one of the ones that she talked about was how like women, they were told not to breastfeed for a long time.
Yeah.
And she like never super agreed with that, but she's a government employee and like you have to abide by the rules. And so now the trend, at the time that I was there, the trend had kind of switched, and they were encouraging the lactancia, and so they were encouraging breastfeeding. And she was like really pleased about that because she felt like she wasn't going counter to what her own values were. But just in general, you kind of see all these people who live incredibly close to nature, and then you see kind of the sterilization creeping in, kind of like it's just a clinic and it seems exciting, and it totally did help a lot of people, but then there's like a distrust in anything in dirt in soil, and you just like,
it's scary, and the germaphobe.
Yes,
and
like
the hygiene hypothesis.
Yeah, the pendulum swings too far.
Extreme.
Yes,
we need a little dirt. I would say the CAFOs, that's a little too much dirt because we've sterilized them to the point where, like, I think about it like real estate. If we go and we till up the land and there's none of the healthy biology in the soil, which includes viruses, mycelium from fungus, bacteria, the root structures, probably way more complex than I'm even saying it. Like, there's a whole world going on beneath our feet. And we just till it up and we rip everything out. Now that real estate is available. There was a great movie based on one of Michael Pollan's books. I think it was Michael Pollan, Fat, Salt, Sugar, and... anyway, there's a Netflix series that he did on ferments.
Oh, nice.
And he had this woman on who had she was a nun living in France, I believe. PhD. Microbiology. I was like, oh, what a life. Like, you just get to spend your life dedicated to God and science. I love it. She actually was able to sell cheese that was made in a traditional French wooden vat.
Yeah.
And she was able to prove to their version of like the FDA, like, actually my fermented cheese is much safer than my sterilized cheese made in a stainless steel vat. which harbored E. coli. And she never once had an E. coli problem in what we would think of as, oh my God, it's a wooden vat. Like, can she get it clean enough?
Yeah.
And raw and that's scary stuff, right?
Yeah.
She was able to prove with her microbiology, like, degree and understanding, actually, this is better for us.
Yes. So, exactly.
So we need to be safe. And when we're having surgery, absolutely, we can have it be sterile. Sure, and that has saved a lot of lives.
Definitely.
We can wash our hands before childbirth. Definitely. Absolutely. Do we really need to sterilize everything to the nth degree all the time?
Well, that sterility is like a little bit of a delusion.
100%.
And there's a really good book called Never Home Alone, and it talks about all the microbes that live in and on us and that actually help us stay alive. It's amazing. Yeah. But
sorry, germaphobes, you are covered head to toe.
I know, and I which is amazing. It's how we're alive. Like we're less. It's nice to know we're more connected and we don't have to be so afraid of these amazing plants.
We don't have to be afraid at all. And Horton, here's a who.
Yeah.
Okay? A speck on speck on speck.
That's awesome, yeah.
And as someone, on top of being part of PETA and being a vegetarian, I was a germaphobe.
Oh.
I was very much the hand sanitizer. Like, it's crazy to see myself, the transformation I've made as I've learned and understood the complexities, the nuances that come with not only soil, but also our personal health. And too much cleanliness is a problem, the hygiene hypothesis with asthma, allergies, and eczema.
Yes.
And we're seeing kids even be born to families that take really good care of themselves. They're not eating ultra-processed foods, and their kids are still being born with head-to-toe eczema. What's going on there?
Yeah.
Our immune systems have been so damaged by this aggressive, purported sterilization that we think that we needed to do because we're scared of the germs, and it's actually caused more harm. It's that pendulum that you were talking about.
Exactly.
We need a little bit of both.
Yeah.
There's a time and a place, I'd like to say.
That book, Never Home Alone, has a case study in it from, I think, the Netherlands, I can't remember, somewhere in Europe, of instances of allergies and asthma in kids being correlated, decreasing with just the introduction of a single house plant or a pet.
Or pet, yep.
In their house. So my graduate degree is in ecosystem studies, and so I come at things from like an ecosystem perspective, and so
systems.
In ecosystems there's successions, and nature abhors a vacuum. So if you try sterilizing something, you can never actually totally sterilize. Even Chernobyl, wasn't totally sterile. I don't mean to say that, but
right. No, but I get what you're saying. There's still something.
There is still something that will survive, and it might not necessarily be like what we want to see, but it will. That first succession will pave the way for secondary succession and tertiary and so on until there's a forest now again in Chernobyl, and
you see this with fires too, right? Complete destruction that leads to creation of the next level. And this
resets.
Is the whole weed thing, right?
Yes, exactly.
Dandelions are bad, and white top or yarrow needs to go. But those are actually telling us they are tending the soil for us so that we can read and understand what's going on as far as the nutrients go.
Yeah, there's symptoms. Yeah, there's symptoms of disturbance, and so it's just showing us what has happened. And if we want to address the cause, we're not just gonna try to eliminate the dandelions, because that's just the symptom.
You mean all that Roundup we've been spraying isn't the best option?
I just mean to say, we were just talking about how when we were younger, we were so certain that we were doing what was right and what was best for us.
Yep.
And then we have since learned, I think we have learned. And so if we can approach things with an open mind and a curious mind and say, well, we've been using Roundup and we still see pigweed is a big, Roundup is no longer effective on pigweed. And so
we just got to make it stronger.
Okay, well, that's one option. Let's do we've put so much stock in the scientific method, then let's try another variable so that we're not just running the same experiment, which isn't really an experiment.
It's not. It's just crazy. And Einstein says this, you try the same thing over and over expecting different results.
Is definition of insanity.
Exactly.
Yes.
So I like this approaching it with curiosity and we have to allow ourselves the capacity to change and be like, I was wrong.
Yes, exactly. Having like a nimble mind. That was one of my questions on the board last week. It was, what is something you've changed your mind about? To like encourage plasticity and like especially in an election year where we're approaching, like politicians are incentivized to stand their ground, like not change their mind.
Right,
We
which is
ridicule
very strange.
flip-floppers, but really like
It's not flip-flopping. It's like you had a conversation
you
with
grew.
someone.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
exactly.
changed your perspective.
You learned something. That's amazing.
That's what I think is so important. So we're getting close to the end here. So I like this book that you mentioned, the No Risk Ranching.
Oh, yeah.
So for leasing, so for someone that doesn't have a lot or they're not sure if this is where they want to go, what else would you recommend for someone that might be curious to dip their toe in to get started in this? Because the average age of the farmers and ranchers in the United States is mid-60s. That's a crisis.
It's 67, and the average age for a beginning farmer rancher, which is just someone who has been doing it for less than 10 years, is 47.
It's not, I mean, it's better, but it's not much better.
Yeah, like you still, like it is kind of hard on the body. Like
Yeah.
your body does. We need to stay moving. I know that, but also like it can be hard on your body. Your body
Right.
starts to break down a little bit. So I'd say podcast is my number one recommendation. I think like Caleb grew up on a ranch, and so that was how he initially wanted to start. His family worked ranches, and that was he at least had some background of like stockmanship and that kind of thing. But and then I had some educational background in my work in the Peace Corps, and but really it was like doing it where we bought cows, and so we were like, well, now we have to graze them.
Yeah, right, invest.
You have to like actually do it, and you have to make mistakes, because that is how we learn, and we were going to make mistakes no matter what. And podcasts, like there are so many excellent regenerative ag podcasts is with John Kempf. He's phenomenal, and a lot of like he's a soil scientist, and it's deeply nerdy and amazing. But if you want to start a little more like surface, like humans love, we tell stories, and we learn from stories, and so there's a lot of like farming and ranching podcasts that interview other farmers and ranchers who are trying stuff.
Right.
And like Herd Quitter, Working Cows, there's a bunch.
Herd Quitter.
Any Google search will bring up the best farming and ranching podcasts. And
Will Harris, Gabe Brown.
Yeah. I also encourage people to volunteer. I think like having someone to tell you their lessons learned and be encouraging and let you try stuff, and you're helping them at the same time. Right. That's like amazing.
You're learning a skill.
Yeah.
And that's something, I've been a little like, okay, I don't want to work for someone again unless there's a skill that I need to learn and someone has that and is willing to like kind of mentor me in that understanding. That's how we used to do things before academia became the beast that it is.
Yes, and now we have this like cult of the expert, people who like come in and they like tell you,
let me tell you
exactly what you need to do on your land or in your life without fully understanding your context. Like really, if we can empower people to like trust themselves, look for information, definitely like be informed, but also decide knowing like fully, no one knows your context the way you do.
Exactly.
And
the finger pointing, let me tell you how to do it.
Also I sell the product. It's like, that's a little going back to like the looking for the incentives.
Right.
Possibly perverse
incentives.
We didn't
really talk about like the big ag stuff that we were talking about prior. But one of the most alarming statistics I heard in The Common Ground, which is a new documentary that came out a couple years ago now?
I think so.
Put together by the same producers of Kiss the Ground, which is available for free on Netflix if you have a subscription. They said that 98% of profits from a farm go to buying seeds, buying fertilizer. When it's conventionally done.
Yeah.
Conventionally means you use the Roundup Ready seeds, you basically go into a huge amount of debt every year and pray that you don't have a hailstorm, which is what happened to Gabe Brown 3 seasons in a row.
Right.
So his story is pretty profound, and he's kind of the main character or one of the main ranches that gets discussed in both Common Ground and Kiss the Ground. And now, as a regenerative farmer, he takes home most of the profits. It's not going to these big businesses. So the incentive to encourage us and actually do the research, there's no money in doing the research here. The research is boots on the ground, you see for yourself.
Yeah.
Look at Will Harris, look at Gabe Brown. They're both in different areas. Gabe Brown's in what, North Dakota?
North Dakota,
And then Will's
Harris
in
Georgia.
Georgia. These are people that did
Very
this.
different ecosystems.
Very different ecosystems, very different climates in the winter.
Yeah.
It can be done regardless of where you live.
Yeah,
That's really what it comes down to.
I think regenerative ag operates on principles rather than like
Yes.
specific practices, and it does
Exactly.
encourage.
It's becoming more critical thinking.
It is very
Okay,
much
this season we got hail a few times. What are we going to do to support the land?
Yes, and it would like that is very human specific too, and like community specific. Like, do you have another enterprise that you can shift to, or
It's just like allowing there to be that dynamicness.
yes,
We say
exactly.
homeostasis. I don't believe in homeostasis because that means static. It's homeodynamic, constantly shifting. And that's what I appreciate about the regenerative ag movement, which is, again, the Common Ground did a good job of like showcasing various communities of people, cultures, and these principles that they come from. This is old wisdom.
Yes.
And it's finally being rejuvenated, if you will.
Yeah.
And we're lucky to live where we live, where there's a lot of density of regen ag than in other areas.
And we haven't gone so far as to like pave over
Exactly.
all of our soil.
People are doing conservation easements, so it's like, Montrose County is a right to farm community, which means if you have land, you can farm on it. And we shouldn't be ashamed of doing that. Know your farmers, know your food. If we don't have any farms, we ain't got no food. So that's part of my whole concern. Like those whole bumper stickers, they go witty quips for a reason.
It's so funny. This is something that I just have been thinking about last week. I'm relatively like, what do I want to say? I don't mind too much what other people think of me. I think that I've been pretty, or like my parents raised me pretty well to like not be too worried about like status or whatever. But someone last week was walking by all of our booths at the farmers market, and they were showing their kid, and they were like, this is what they call a job. But it was like, I think it was intended well, but something later that day too, this is like human negativity bias where I'm only remembering the bad, but I do remember the good too. But someone else later was like, oh, do you have a college degree? And I don't know why I didn't say like, in my head, I'm like, I'm pretty well educated.
Yeah, for sure.
But there is this like, we have pedestalized these like, not white collar, and I don't mean to down.
No, you're totally right though. We have, and it's made college degrees kind of worthless.
And
I said it. I'm not afraid, and I'm highly educated too.
And there's a dissatisfaction in overseeing instead of producing.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying like everyone needs to be a farmer. That'd be awesome. I guess like we would be a lot more sustainable if everyone was. Maybe we all just grow our own food.
It's like less than 3% of Americans are farmers.
Something.
It's like a very small percentage when it used to be like 70% of people were farmers.
Yeah, and I think.
Don't quote me on those stats. It's something like that though. Something like ridiculous.
But and I don't mean to be overly nostalgic either for the way things were in times of yore. But
Right,
like,
no.
but when you talk about things like apprenticeships and learning from people who have practiced and being a producer instead of like having a clean office
Paper
job.
pusher.
Yeah, like.
I'm not afraid to call it.
There is a lot of pre-industrialized revolution, like wisdom that I hope that we can take the good and throw out the bad. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. Again, learn and say we don't have to go fully. Everybody needs to be in academia all the time, and these thinkers, like we still need those.
Yes.
But we also still need craftsmen and like producers and people that care about the quality of the things. And like, yeah, I can go to Walmart and buy a cutting board, but I'd much rather buy a cutting board that was made and intentionally crafted by someone.
That's awesome.
Because that's something that I care about.
Yeah.
Do I do that for all of my cutting boards? No. We recently broke our cutting board, so that's why, now.
That's fair. Yes, they're on your mind.
It's on my mind.
Yeah.
But I get what you're saying, and the fact is like we need more people that are producing and choosing to do more trades, if you will.
Yeah, I used to be a high school English teacher, and I taught 11th and 12th grade, and so my students, part of their thesis for 11th grade is career oriented. They have to write about a career, and so many of my students would write about just some random word that they would find Google and I just like I wish I would have been a better teacher. I think if I knew what I knew now of like how many paths there are. I knew at the time I would encourage, like, we have very good vocational schools in Miami, and I would encourage that kind of stuff, but I think now, like, being able to, having said, like, I walk the walk of, I've tried a lot of different things, and I keep learning, and I hope that kids can take that as a...
You don't have to be stuck.
You don't have to be stuck, and also it isn't great to be stuck. It's, if you stop learning, you stop growing. Like,
that's right.
And there are other paths that don't have to cost $1 million, and volunteering is one of them, I think. Of
Amen
just like,
to that. Yeah. So the big takeaways is regenerative agriculture is, we do have the capacity to learn from other people, and there are resources available such as the No Risk Ranching and mini podcasts, and I'll link a couple of them into the show notes, but use Google. It's your friend. You're going to find some things. If you're curious to get involved, you can. There is a little bit of a looming crisis in that the age of the average farmer is 67. That's concerning in that we don't have enough. I don't want my food to just come from abroad. We need to be using our land here in the United States. We have abundance of land.
We're very lucky.
We are very lucky in that regard. And the soil, things are a lot more dynamic and fluctuating than we want to give them credit. It's not so static. And when we can think about things in terms of this dynamic relationship, this whole world that we have, not only on our body, but beneath our feet, and how we're working together, it's very much like a working community of like, really, you should know who your farmers are, if that's in your capacity. Again, thinking about Maslow's hierarchy and understanding that not everybody who's working 2 jobs and is a single parent has that mental capacity. That's okay. We start where we are, and that's going to be good enough, and we support each other from a community level, and that's okay too. So Brittany, where can people find you if they want to get in touch?
They can find us at the farmers markets here in Montrose. We have I would just encourage people to like call or email, and my number and our email are on our website, uncompahgrefarms.com or uncofarms.com. And I really enjoy the personal interactions. I think the social part of knowing people is something that we have also...
Social connections, so
yes,
important.
It's so important to our health, and we don't see it in our like blood numbers or anything like that, but it is... There are studies that demonstrate the importance of like a social interaction. So
absolutely.
Give me a holler.
Yep. And for you guys, I misspoke on the last podcast. I thought I was having Jake Gray on today, and I was actually having Brittany on. So Jake Gray of Gray Acre Farms, or Mountain Bird, I believe now, will be my next guest, and he'll be talking about growing chickens in Western Colorado. If you enjoyed this podcast or you found it valuable at all, please like and subscribe. Share it with someone that's been a little bit of a naysayer around ag, and let's see if we can get more minds to be more open. And if you do live in Western Colorado, I highly recommend snagging some tickets when they open up in November to the Soil, Food, and Farm Forum. Thank you. I don't know why my brain can't handle that.
Well, it used to be 2 separate conferences, and then they combined it, and instead of... Well, it's not the most... It's a little awkward name.
It's a little awkward of a name. But thank you guys so much for tuning in, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.